The champagne flute never hit the floor. That was the detail everyone remembered afterward. Not the crack of impact, not the sharp gasp that swept through the apex like a cold wind off the bay, but the fact that Natalia caught it. Mid-reach, mid-strike, one hand stopping a fist that could have caved in an old man's cheekbone, the other hand snatching a tilting glass before a single drop of crystal touched the white tablecloth. She didn't spill a drop. She didn't flinch. And she didn't let go of the bodyguard's wrist. The entire 43rd floor went silent, 43 stories of Manhattan's most expensive silence, as every suited man, every bejeweled dinner guest, every ghost of a server in pressed white linen turned to stare at the waitress holding back a 240-pound enforcer like she was straightening a picture frame on a wall. The bodyguard looked down at his captured fist, then up at her face, then at the man seated at the table, Leo Danes, whose name was spoken in certain rooms the way people speak the names of natural disasters, and the bodyguard made the worst calculation of his professional career. He decided she was just a waitress. He pulled. She didn't move. There is a restaurant in Manhattan that does not have a website. It does not have a sign above the door. It does not accept reservations through any app, any concierge service, or any phone line a civilian could find. It exists between the 42nd and 44th floors of a building whose address is known only to people who have already been inside it, and those people do not share addresses. The apex. If you have to ask whether you're allowed in, you are not. Natalia had worked there for 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. She knew the weight of every door handle. She knew which marble tile near the bar had the faintest hollow sound when you stepped on it. She avoided it, because hollow sounds carried. She knew that the sommelier, Marcus, always paused 3 beats too long before recommending the second most expensive bottle, which meant the most expensive one was about to run out. She knew the kitchen ran hot on Thursdays. She knew the northeast corner table had a sight line to the service entrance, the elevator bank, and the emergency stairwell simultaneously. She had chosen that corner deliberately. The other savers called her quiet. Management called her efficient. The regulars, men with faces that never fully smiled, women with jewelry that could buy apartment buildings, called her nothing at all. She was, to them, a function, a silent mechanism of comfort, the hand that refilled your water before you noticed it was low, the presence that vanished the moment you no longer needed it. Natalia had spent 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days perfecting that invisibility. She had not come to the apex to serve champagne. She had come for table 7. It was a Thursday when Leo Danes walked in. She clocked him before the Maître-d' did, because she was already watching the door, had been watching it since 7:42 p.m. when the reservation under the name Harlow had appeared on the evening's manifest, and something about a single name with no party size attached had made the back of her neck go quiet in that particular way her father had once told her to trust above all other instincts. When your body goes quiet, Natalia, that's not calm. That's your mind already knowing what your eyes haven't confirmed yet. Leo Danes was exactly as the intelligence files had described him. Tall, sharp, a tailored black suit worn the way a blade is worn, not for decoration, but because it fit the purpose. Dark hair, a face built for making rooms recalibrate their own hierarchies the moment he entered them. He moved like someone who had never once, in his entire life, needed to wonder whether he belonged somewhere. She watched him cross to table 7. She watched the 3 men who followed him, 2 bodyguards flanking, one older man walking slightly behind Leo's right shoulder, white-haired and careful with his steps, one hand resting on his forearm like a man protecting something fragile inside his own ribcage. Natalia recognized the older man. She had been looking for him for 4 months. She picked up her tray, straightened her apron, and walked toward table 7 with the practiced grace of a woman who was simply doing her job and the controlled precision of a woman who had been trained since the age of 14 to read the microtells of violence before it announced itself. The bodyguard on Leo's left had been rotating his right shoulder intermittently since he sat down. Barely perceptible, a nervous habit or pain response, but his eyes were moving wrong, too fast, grazing exits rather than threats. Her father had called that pattern the last check. The way a man scanned a room when he already knew what was about to happen in it. She set down the water glasses. She noted the bodyguard's right hand had drifted below the tablecloth. She smiled at the elderly man with white hair, who looked up at her with tired, curious eyes. The eyes of a man who had carried a secret so long it had started to feel like a second skeleton inside him. Hold on, she told him without words, without expression, without breaking the seamless choreography of a Thursday night dinner service at the Apex. I see you. I'm here. Hold on. She turned back toward the service station. The bodyguard's shoulders stopped rotating. His chair scraped back, and in the half-second before his fist moved, Natalia was already turning. The champagne flute never hit the floor, and neither did the old man. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. She had learned the restaurant the way a surgeon learns anatomy, not from diagrams, but from repetition, from pressure, from the thousand small moments where the difference between precision and error was measured in millimeters. The Apex opened at 6. Natalia arrived at 4:30. Not because the schedule demanded it, because 4:30 was when the building was still exhaling the day, when delivery crates were being stacked in the service corridor, when the kitchen staff moved loose and unhurried, when the security rotation had its one predictable gap between the afternoon team clocking out and the evening team finding their positions. 4:30 was when a woman in a white shirt carrying a clipboard looked like infrastructure. Necessary, unremarkable, already forgotten before she turned the corner. She had mapped every table's sightline in the first 2 weeks. She knew which booth in the eastern alcove caught the reflection of the elevator doors in the decorative mirror above the bar, meaning you could watch you arrived without turning your head. She knew the ventilation system ran loudest between 8 and 9, which created a 12-foot radius of conversational privacy around tables near the north wall, and that powerful men, unconsciously comforted by that white noise, tended to speak more freely within it. She knew the panic button behind the host stand had a 3-second delay. She had tested it once, accidentally on purpose, just to confirm. The other savers thought she was a perfectionist. Maria, who worked the Western section and had been at the Apex for 6 years, once told her she moved like she was diffusing something. Natalia had laughed at that, warmly, appropriately. She did not explain that Maria was not entirely wrong. She kept a small notebook in the interior pocket of her apron, the kind with a sewn lining, custom altered, which she had done herself on a Tuesday night with a seam ripper and a needle. The notebook contained nothing incriminating. Names written as initials, table numbers, patterns noted in a shorthand that looked, to any casual eye, like a server tracking order modifications and dietary notes. T4, red, no ice, arrives 8:15 consistent. T9, always requests Miguel, tips in cash, envelope, never counted at table. Information, the kind that accumulated into a picture if you were patient enough and disciplined enough and willing to be invisible long enough. Her brother had been in Rikers for 14 months. She had been patient for 14 months. The reservation under the name Harlow had unsettled her since she'd first seen it on the manifest, and by the time 7:40 arrived, she had identified the specific texture of her unease. It was the absence of detail. Every other reservation carried the sediment of irregular dietary notes, preferred server, wine preferences logged from previous visits. Harlow was clean, pristine, like a page that had been deliberately wiped. Someone had called in a favor to get that reservation. She was behind the service station at the north wall, decanting a Barolo with the unhurried attention it required, when the elevator doors opened and Leo Danes walked in. She did not look up immediately. That was rule 1, never be the person who looks up. She let her peripheral vision do the walk, let the room's reaction tell her what she needed to know before she confirmed it with her own eyes. And the room did react. Not loudly. These were not people who gasped or stared. But there was a subtle gravitational shift, a reorientation of spines and shoulders, the way tall grass tilts when wind passes through it without a sound. She set down the decanter. He was exactly what the file on her phone, encrypted, behind 2 passwords stored in a folder labeled recipe notes, had described, not in his features, which he catalogued quickly and set aside, but in the quality of his presence, the way he moved through the room without navigating it, the way the Maitre-D adjusted his own pace to match rather than lead. Men like Leo Danes did not get guided to tables. The room simply rearranged itself around the fact of their arrival. 3 men followed him. She counted without counting, the way her father had taught her, peripheral and automatic, the way you count steps on a staircase you've climbed 1,000 times without ever thinking about your feet. 2 security. 1 civilian. The civilian was the one she focused on. He was old, mid-70s, she estimated, with the kind of white hair that had once been very dark and hadn't fully accepted the transition. He moved carefully, a man acquainted with his own fragility, and he kept his left hand pressed lightly against his ribs in a gesture too habitual to be conscious. Protecting something, or the memory of protecting something. He wore a suit that had been expensive 15 years ago and had been maintained with the meticulous dignity of a man who believed in keeping things. She knew his name. She had known it for 4 months. Aurelio Mancini, former records keeper for the syndicate's Eastern operations. The man who had, according to her brother's attorney, physically handled the documents that had been altered to place her brother at a location he had never been, on a night he had spent, in fact, sitting in their mother's kitchen eating reheated soup because their mother had called him worried about the boiler making a new sound. 14 months. 14 months of a man who had never hurt anyone sitting in a cage because someone needed a name to attach to a crime and had chosen his. Aurelio Mancini was the only person alive who could prove it. She picked up her tray and walked to table 7. She introduced herself as she always did. Name, section, the evening specials delivered with the precise warmth of someone who genuinely meant it and somehow never seemed to be performing it. She watched the 2 bodyguards settle into their professional blankness. She watched Leo Danes glance at her once, the assessment rapid and thorough and then complete, the way a man accustomed to evaluating rooms evaluates people. Not rudely, but efficiently, a thing observed and categorized and filed. She watched the bodyguard on the left. He was large, broad through the shoulders, with the particular stillness of a man trained to project calm. But his right shoulder had been moving since he sat down. Not dramatically, a fraction of a rotation, repeated at irregular intervals, the kind of unconscious physical tick that the body produces when the mind is rehearsing something. Her father had called it the body's rough draft, the way muscle memory prepares itself ahead of instruction. His eyes were moving wrong too, not scanning for threats. Threat scanning had a different quality, broader, more patient. This was something tighter. Exits, angles. He was checking whether a specific sequence of movements was possible, and he was doing it quietly. And he had the practiced effect of a man who believed no one at this table was watching him closely enough to notice. She noticed. She set down the water glasses and excused herself with a smile. At the service station, she poured a glass of still water she didn't need to pour and stood with her back to the room for exactly 4 seconds. The amount of time required to make a decision she had already made 3 weeks ago when she had first confirmed that Aurelio Mancini would be at this table tonight. She was going to have to be faster than the bodyguard. She had been faster than men like him before. Not many times, but enough times that the knowledge sat in her bones rather than her memory, calm and matter-of-fact, the way you know you can swim without needing to think about it until you're already in the water. She turned back toward the table. It was the old man who made it complicated, which was to say, the old man was the reason she was here, and also the reason she couldn't simply watch and wait and gather. She had gone back to table 7 twice on professional pretexts, the bread service, a wine adjustment, and on the second visit Aurelio Mancini had looked at her, really looked, the way people rarely do in restaurants where the polite contract of invisibility runs both directions. "You have your mother's hands," he said. She went very still. "The way you hold the tray," he continued, quietly, beneath the ambient sound of the room. "Flat-palmed. My wife used to carry trays like that. She said it was the only way to keep things level." He said it with the distant tenderness of a man who had outlived the person he was describing, and he watched Natalia's face with eyes that were tired but not dim, eyes that had seen a great deal and had stopped pretending otherwise. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't think we've met." "No," he said, "but I knew your father." The air between them changed quality. She kept her face exactly where she'd put it, pleasant, attentive, professionally warm, and she said, at a volume engineered for him alone, "Then you know I'm not here for the tips." Something moved through his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the particular relief of a man who had been carrying a confession for so long that the arrival of someone to confess to felt less like danger and more like mercy. "I have copies," he said, "of everything. I kept them because," he stopped, looked at his hands. "I kept them because I knew a day would come when I would need to answer for what I allowed to happen." "Where?" she said. "Safe deposit. Box registered under a name I haven't used in 30 years. He slid his left hand across the tablecloth by a half-inch, barely a movement, and she saw the edge of a folded card beneath his ring finger. The bank, the name, and the box number. She did not reach for it immediately. She set down the bread basket with her right hand, and as she drew it back she passed her left over the card in a motion so smooth, so continuous with the natural arc of the service, that even a man watching closely would have seen only a waitress clearing her hands from the table. The card went into the lining of her apron. She straightened, smiled, said, "Enjoy the bread, sir. The kitchen uses a rosemary butter this evening," and turned away. She made it 4 steps toward the service corridor. That was when the bodyguard's chair scraped back. She had 3 pieces of information already assembled and running: the angle of the bodyguard's approach, the fact that his target was the old man and not Leo Danes, and the champagne flute on the edge of table 7 that was going to hit the floor in approximately 1 second if nobody caught it. She was already moving when the rest of the room was still processing the sound of the chair. It was not a dramatic movement. That was the thing that nobody in the room could fully articulate afterward when they tried to explain what they had seen to people who hadn't been there. It didn't look like a fight. It looked like a correction, the same quality of motion as reaching out to steady a vase someone has accidentally nudged. Efficient, almost domestic. She caught his wrist with her left hand. She caught the champagne flute with her right. The bodyguard was larger than her by a significant margin and had the kind of physical confidence that comes from never having been stopped by someone who looked like her. He pulled. She didn't move. Not because she was stronger. She wasn't, not in any straightforward sense, but because she had planted her weight in the precise geometry her father had drilled into her over 10,000 hours of practice in a room above his dry-cleaning business, and because stopping a man's momentum is a matter of physics rather than muscle, and she had understood the physics since she was 16. He pulled again, harder, with the added anger of disbelief. She turned his wrist inward by 3 degrees, applied pressure to a specific point below the thumb, and watched his face process the sensation. The sudden bright clarity of pain in an unexpected location, the confusion of a body receiving information it didn't anticipate. He stopped pulling. The room had gone entirely silent. She was aware, peripherally, of Leo Dane's expression, the specific quality of stillness that crosses a face when something has occurred that was not in any of the available models of the world. Not anger, not threat response, something closer to recalibration. She set the champagne flute down on the tablecloth. She released the bodyguard's wrist. She looked at him with the same pleasant professionalism she had been wearing all evening and said, quietly, "Can I bring anyone anything else?" Nobody answered. The bodyguard took a step back. He was breathing harder than he should have been for a physical exchange that had lasted less than 10 seconds. Aurelio Mancini was looking at her with the expression of a man watching a thing he had believed was lost be found. And Leo Danes was looking at her the way you look at something that has just rewritten a fundamental assumption, with an attention so complete and focused it had its own gravitational weight. She felt it land. She kept her face clean. The private room was on the 42nd floor, accessible through a door behind the bar that most of the staff believed led to secondary wine storage. It contained a small table, 2 chairs, a narrow window overlooking the bay, and no cameras, a detail she had confirmed 7 weeks ago when she'd spent a Tuesday morning reviewing the building's security schematic, which was filed, improbably, in the same city permit database as the fire suppression system. She had wondered, in the abstract, what this room would feel like. It felt like being studied. Leo Dane sat across from her with his jacket on and his expression arranged into something that wasn't quite neutrality. Neutrality is the absence of information, and his face was not absent of information, it was simply controlled. He had the quality of a man who never needed to perform menace because menace was simply the natural byproduct of his attention. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then, who trained you? Not a question. A statement aimed at her like a key aimed at a lock. I don't know what you mean, she said. You took Victor's wrist at the flexor retinaculum, he said, below the abductor pollicis longus. That's not a street technique. That's not gym training. Someone who knew anatomy and application taught you that specific hold at that specific point. He tilted his head slightly. Who? She looked at him. She was calculating. Not the answer. She had already decided on the answer before she sat down, but the timing of it, the weight of it, the exact moment at which the truth would land most effectively. My father, she said. Something moved in Leo Dane's face. Barely. A micro-expression so brief it was almost subaudible. But she had been trained by a man who had taught her to read faces the way other fathers teach their daughters to read weather as a matter of survival. Your father, he said. Marcus Voss, she said. You knew him as Marco. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the restaurant had produced. That one had been shocked. This one was thick, structural, load-bearing, the silence of a man standing inside a revelation and taking stock of what it changed. Leo Dane set both hands flat on the table. Marco Voss has been dead for 6 years, he said. I know, she said. I buried him. He looked at her for a long moment. The controlled expression had not broken, but something behind it had shifted. She could see it in the faint adjustment of his posture, the way his shoulders had released the tension they'd been holding since she sat down. He saved my life, Leo Dane said. Once. A long time ago. In a way I have never been able to repay. I know that too, Natalia said. That's why I'm telling you who I am instead of lying. She held his gaze steady. And that's why I need you to listen to what I'm about to say. Outside the narrow window, Manhattan laid itself out across the dock in 10,000 lights, indifferent and enormous, the way cities are, containing everything, explaining nothing. Natalia reached into the lining of her apron and placed the small folded card on the table between them. My brother is innocent, she said, and I can prove it, but I can't get to the proof alone. Leo Danes looked at the card, then at her, then at the card again, with the particular attention of a man who understood that small pieces of paper could rewrite the architecture of very large situations. Tell me, he said, and for the first time in 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, Natalia allowed herself to believe that the silence she had been cultivating, all that careful, practiced, surgical invisibility, had finally served its purpose. She told him everything, not everything in the way of confession. She was not built for confession, had never been the kind of person who found relief in the unburdening of information. She told him everything in the way of a briefing. Precise, sequenced, the kind of account that respects the intelligence of the person receiving it by refusing to editorialize, by trusting the facts to carry their own weight. Her brother, Daniel, 29 years old, former logistics coordinator for a freight company whose client list overlapped, in ways Daniel had never been told and could not have known, with the syndicate's import operations along the eastern seaboard. The night of the alleged meeting, the one the prosecution had built their case around, the one that placed Daniel in a warehouse in Red Hook exchanging documents with a man currently cooperating with the federal government, Daniel had been in their mother's kitchen in the Bronx. He had fixed her boiler. He had eaten her soup. He had left at 11:15 and taken the 6 train home. 3 witnesses, none of them credible to a jury, Because two were family and one was a 6 to 7-year-old woman with early-stage macular degeneration who couldn't reliably identify faces at distance. The documents placing Daniel at the warehouse had been created after the fact, backdated, handled by a records keeper who had since retired quietly to a brownstone in Carroll Gardens and kept in a safe deposit box registered under the name of a man who had died in 1987, the originals that proved the forgery. Leo had listened to all of it without interrupting. That was the first thing she noted about him as a thinking person rather than a physical presence. He listened the way very few people listen, with the full weight of his attention, not preparing his response while she spoke but actually receiving what she said and letting it settle before he did anything with it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Victor," he said then. "The bodyguard." "Yes." "He wasn't there to protect me tonight." "No," she said. "He was there to make sure Aurelio didn't leave that table with the ability to talk to anyone." Leo's jaw shifted slightly, a small movement, but she had learned in the last 20 minutes that his small movements carried significant weight. "Someone in my organization sent him." "Someone in your organization has been using your infrastructure to run operations you don't know about," she said carefully. "The framing of my brother was one of them. The freight company Daniel worked for was a conduit. Someone needed the conduit shut down and a name attached to it before a federal investigation got close enough to find the real one." She paused. "Whoever gave Victor tonight's instructions knows that Aurelio has the originals. They've known for some time. They've been waiting for an opportunity." Leo looked at the card on the table between them. "You've been in my restaurant for almost a year," he said. 11 months. Building to tonight." "Yes." He studied her face with an expression she couldn't fully read, which was unusual, and which she noted. "Your father," he said, "once spent 7 to 2 hours in a basement in Minsk so that I could walk out of a situation that was not supposed to have survivors. He did it because I had, 6 months earlier, done something for him that he said changed the direction of his life." He stopped. "He never told me what that something had produced." "It produced Daniel," she said, "and me." The weight of that settled between them like something physical. Leo Danes picked up the folded card. He looked at it for a long moment, not reading it, she thought, but making a decision in the vicinity of it, using it as a focal point the way people sometimes use objects when the real work is happening entirely inside their own minds. He set it back down. "The black site," he said. "The federal holding facility for confiscated syndicate documents, the one they call the archive. The originals Aurelio kept are copies. The prosecution's forgeries are stored there as primary evidence." He looked at her. "If we retrieve them and establish their falsification alongside Aurelio's originals, the case against your brother dissolves." "I know," she said. "I've been trying to find a way into the archive for 4 months." "I know the way in," Leo said. "I built half of it." She looked at him. "The archive was constructed using a security firm that I own through 3 intermediaries," he said, with the flat directness of a man long past the performance of innocence. "Which means I know its layout, its rotation schedule, and the location of its single structural vulnerability." He paused. "I have never used that knowledge because I have never needed to." "Until now," she said. "Until now," he agreed. He stood, buttoned his jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who had just made an irrevocable decision and was at peace with it. "We go tomorrow night. There is a 6-hour window between security rotations on the northeast side. We will need exactly 4 of those hours." He looked at her across the small table. "Your father died with a debt uncollected. I don't carry debts." Natalia stood. "Neither do I," she said. The archive occupied the sub-basement of a building in Red Hook that presented to the street as a mid-sized import logistics firm, which was, she reflected, grimly appropriate. The entrance Aurelio's card had mapped was a service corridor accessible through a loading dock that went quiet at 1:15 in the morning when the contracted security firm ran its changeover. Leo had told her 4 hours. They used 2.5. She had expected him to be competent. She had not fully anticipated the specific quality of his competence, The way he moved through the building's infrastructure with the confidence of someone reading a text he had written himself, making decisions in real time with a speed and precision that required no consultation, no hesitation, no visible process. He simply knew, and he adapted, twice, to variables she had not anticipated, with the fluid economy of a man for whom the unexpected was simply a subgenre of the expected. She found, to her own mild surprise, that she trusted his judgment in the space between decisions. Not blindly. She was not built for blind trust, had not been built for it by temperament or training, but provisionally, in the specific and limited way you trust the person next to you on a ledge who clearly knows ledges. The files were in a steel cabinet on the third sublevel, catalogued under a federal case number she had memorized 4 months ago from a document her brother's attorney had shown her in a conference room while looking like a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Leo opened the cabinet in 40 seconds, using a sequence she did not ask him to explain. She found the forgeries. She photographed them. She took the originals. They were back on street level by 3:45. She would reflect, later, that the night had been almost clean, that it had carried the particular quality of a plan executing correctly, the rare, fragile sensation of things going as they were supposed to go, which she had learned to distrust precisely because of how seductive it was. She should have trusted the distrust. The docks at Red Hook at 4 in the morning had the quality of a stage set between performances, all the physical infrastructure of industry without the human noise that gave it meaning. Shipping containers stacked in columns. The low industrial groan of the water against the pilings. A smell of salt and diesel and cold metal. Carver was already there when they arrived. She didn't know the name Carver until Leo said it, quietly, when they came around the corner of the last container row and found him standing in the wash of a single work light with 4 men flanking him, all of them armed, all of them with the particular stillness of people who had been waiting and were done waiting. Carver was Leo's second-in-command. She had seen him twice at the apex, always at the far edge of Leo's orbit, always a presence that somehow managed to take up less space than his physical size warranted. A talent for diminishment. She understood now that it had been strategic. "I need the files, Natalia," Carver said. He did not look at Leo when he said it. That was the first signal. He addressed her, not his employer, which meant he had already made a calculation about where the leverage was. "You knew she was coming for them," Leo said. His voice was level. The dangerous level, not the absence of anger but its total compression. "I've known about her for 8 months, Carver said. "I've been patient." He still hadn't looked at Leo. "The freight company was my operation. The documentation was my work. Your girl's brother was a loose end that needed a frame around it, and I built a very clean frame." Now he looked at Leo, and there was something in his expression that was almost apologetic, the expression of a man who genuinely regrets the necessity of a thing while remaining fully committed to it. "Give me the files, and I'll make this simple." "Simple," Leo said. "You don't have to be part of what happens next." The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. She counted them because counting was what she did when her body was preparing for something her mind hadn't yet formally authorized. Then Leo said, very quietly, "You sent Victor to kill Aurelio." "Aurelio made his choice 20 years ago," Carver said. "He just took too long to live with it." The 4 men raised their weapons. She had been in 3 serious physical confrontations in her adult life, not counting the controlled training environments of her father's room above the dry-cleaning business. She knew what her body did when real violence became imminent, the specific chemical clarity, the way peripheral details sharpened while irrelevant information dropped away, the sensation of time becoming granular and navigable rather than continuous. She knew what she could do alone. She did not know, until that night, what she could do besides someone who had been trained by an entirely different tradition toward an entirely complementary result. They moved at the same moment, which she had not planned and which she did not think he had planned either. It was simply the simultaneous recognition of the same window, the half-second in which Carver's attention had moved to Leo and the nearest guard's muzzle had drifted 2 degrees off her center mass. 2 degrees was enough. She took the nearest guard at the knee, not a strike, a redirect, using his own forward weight to fold him sideways and remove him as a line-of-sight problem. In the same motion, she was already past him, inside the reach of the second man, where a weapon becomes an impediment rather than an advantage. Her father had called that distance the honest distance, where size and firepower stopped mattering and only physics and nerve remained. She had nerve. Leo had dealt with the far too with an efficiency she caught only in fragments. She was occupied, the timeline was compressed, the detail that registered was less the specific mechanics than the result, which was that by the time she had her second man controlled and the first one unable to rise, the space around them was quiet. Carver had run. Northeast, Leo said, already moving. Not a question. He had seen the same thing she had, the direction of the movement, the instinct of a man running towards something rather than away. There's a boat, she said, following. There's always a boat. There was a boat. Carver was at the edge of the dock, crossing the last 30 feet between the containers and the water, and Natalia covered the distance faster than he had calculated she would, because men like Carver always made the same error, always carried the assumption that the person they had underestimated would continue to be underestimated right up until the moment that assumption closed around them like a hand. She caught him at the edge of the dock. It was not elegant. It was not the controlled precision of the restaurant or the clean geometry of the archive. It was functional and necessary, and she did not flinch from it. She had his arm behind him, and his forward momentum stopped before the boat's engine had finished turning over, and she held him there, breathing, with the cold water 6 inches below the dock's edge and the city's distant light making the harbor look almost peaceful. Leo arrived at her shoulder. Carver was breathing hard. The calculation had left his expression. What remained was the particular emptiness of a man whose plan has reached its end and who has not prepared anything for what comes after. The documentation, Leo said. Everything. Every copy, every location, every person you've paid. You'll give me all of it. Carver said nothing. You'll give me all of it, Leo said again, with the same tone, which was not louder or harder than the first time, but had a quality of absolute finality that made repetition feel, somehow, like escalation. And then you'll spend the remainder of your professional existence grateful that Marco Voss's daughter was standing on this dock tonight instead of someone with less restraint. Something shifted in Carver's face at the name. You know who she is, Leo said. It was not a question. I know who her father was, Carver said. Then you understand, Leo said, the precise nature of your situation. Daniel Voss walked out of Rikers on a Tuesday morning, which was not a significant day in any other respect, overcast, cold, the particular gray of a New York November that makes the city look like it is considering a different career. He walked out in the clothes he had arrived in 14 months ago, which no longer fit him quite right, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the slightly unmoored quality of a person whose body has forgotten what it feels like to occupy unenclosed space. Natalia was waiting by the car. He saw her and stopped walking. Then he kept walking, faster, and she met him halfway, and she held onto her brother in the middle of a Tuesday morning on the sidewalk outside Rikers and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for so long she had stopped noticing the tension. She did not cry. She had not cried since her father's funeral, and she did not think she would cry again until she had decided the crisis was fully over, which was a standard she recognized as probably unreasonable but which she seemed to be constitutionally unable to revise. Daniel, who had always understood her better than she understood herself, said into her shoulder, "You look exhausted." "I'm fine," she said. "You look like you haven't slept in a year." 11 months, she said. He pulled back and looked at her face with the same eyes their father had, observant, patient, quietly assessing. "Tell me what you did," he said. "Later," she said. "Get in the car." The meeting with Leo was 3 days after Daniel's release, in a room she had not been to before, not the private 42nd floor room, but an office in a building in Midtown that presented no outward indication of its purposes, on a floor accessible only by a key-coded elevator, with windows that looked out over the city with the unobstructed authority of significant altitude. Leo was at the desk when she arrived. He stood when she entered, which she noted. He looked, she thought, like a man who had spent 3 days doing significant internal accounting and had arrived at a position he was prepared to hold. Aurelio's testimony has been submitted, he said. My attorney indicates the case against your brother will be formally dismissed within the week. The federal prosecutor has been presented with the falsification evidence and is currently occupied with a much more interesting investigation. Carver, she said, among others. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She Saturday. He Saturday. I have a proposal. I assumed. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Leo Danes did not appear to operate in the register of quite smiles, but the precursor of one, the structural suggestion. The syndicate has a problem that money and intimidation have not solved, he said. It has enemies who are subtle. People who work from inside, who understand the architecture well enough to build rooms within rooms that I can't see. Victor, Carver, others I haven't found yet. He looked at her. I need someone who thinks the way they think. Who can read a room the way they read a room? Who has the patience to be invisible for 11 months and the precision to act in exactly the right moment when invisibility is no longer the point? Natalia was quiet. I'm not offering you a weapon position, he said. I have weapons. I'm offering you a thinking position. Strategy. Intelligence. The work your father did, but at a table instead of in a basement. He paused. Consiglia. With full access, full authority within your domain, and the understanding that your counsel is not optional decoration, it is operational. She looked at him across the desk. She thought about the notebook in her apron, the hollow tile near the bar, the 4:30 arrivals, the 11 months of making herself invisible in a room full of powerful men who looked through her like glass because they had decided, without examination, that she was not the kind of person who required attention. She thought about what it would mean to stop being invisible, not to become loud. She had no interest in loud, but to be seen, fully, by the people who needed to see her. To bring her full intelligence to bear on problems that mattered at a table where decisions had real weight and real consequence. She thought about her father, who had taught her everything he knew in a room above a dry-cleaning business and had died before he could see what it produced. She thought he would have had opinions about this. She thought, on balance, they would have been favorable. I have conditions, she said. I expected conditions, Leo said. Daniel is untouchable. Permanently. No obligations, no entanglements, no situations where his name appears in any context connected to this world. Agreed. I work with full information. No managed disclosure. If something is relevant to my analysis, I see it, all of it, not the version someone has decided I should see. Agreed. And if I tell you something is wrong, she said, you listen before you act, not after. Leo held a gaze. Your father, he said, told me once that the most dangerous thing a man in my position could do was surround himself with people who were afraid to be right at him. He paused. I have spent 20 years surrounded by exactly those people. I am aware of what it has cost me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, you'll need a new table. I'll have one sent up, he said. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued its vast indifferent business. The million simultaneous transactions of a city that did not pause for resolutions, for reckonings, for the moments when the architecture of a life shifts on its foundations and becomes something new. Natalia looked out at it, at all that light, all that motion, all that noise. She had been invisible in this city for a very long time. She decided she was finished with that, and that is where we leave Natalia Voss. Not in a uniform, not behind a tray, not in the careful, practiced invisibility she wore for 11 months like a second skin. We leave her at a table. Her table. The girl who was trained above a dry-cleaning business in the Bronx. The daughter of a man who died with a debt uncollected. The sister who spent 14 months building toward a single moment, and when that moment came, did not flinch, did not miss, did not spill a single drop. She never spilled a drop. If this story found you today, If Natalia's world pulled you in and wouldn't let you go, then you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Because this is only the beginning of what happens when the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody thought to watch. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. I want to say a personal hello to you, because you're not just a viewer to me. You're the reason this story exists. Like this video if Natalia earned it, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most prepared. I'll see you in the next one. Don't touch him again.